The quiet stroll. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the manicured lawns of Silver Ridge Estates. The neighborhood was a pristine enclave of affluence, with houses that seemed more like monuments than homes. Trees lined the streets, their leaves whispering in the soft breeze. The scene was serene, yet there was an underlying tension in the air that went unnoticed by most of its residents. Michael Adams, dressed in a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans, and sneakers, walked slowly along the tree-lined avenue. His broad shoulders and upright posture hinted at years of discipline, yet his gait was unhurried, almost meditative. He wasn't a man who sought attention, but his presence naturally commanded it. He had chosen this quiet afternoon to reflect, to escape the demands of his high-profile military career. Though few in the neighborhood knew, Michael was a decorated Army general with over 3 decades of service. His quiet demeanor belied the weight of responsibility he carried and the sacrifices he had made for his country. Michael owned a home just a few blocks away, a modest retreat he had purchased years ago as a place to find solace amidst the chaos of his career. To him, Silver Ridge Estates was more than just a wealthy suburb. It was a refuge. Yet as he walked, he remained keenly aware of the occasional sideways glances from neighbors and the subtle shift in the atmosphere whenever he appeared. He'd grown accustomed to these moments, though they never failed to sting. As he rounded the corner, the familiar rumble of a police patrol car broke the quiet. Officer James Davis, a man whose name was whispered with equal parts respect and apprehension in the local community, was making his rounds. Davis prided himself on being the gatekeeper of Silver Ridge, the silent protector who ensured that nothing disturbed its curated perfection. To Davis, the sight of a black man walking alone in this neighborhood was enough to set off internal alarms. From inside his cruiser, Davis's eyes narrowed as he tracked Michael's movements. The man's casual stroll seemed deliberate, unhurried, yet confident in a way that unsettled the officer. Davis adjusted his rearview mirror, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. Something about Michael's calm demeanor irritated him. It wasn't just suspicion. It was an unspoken challenge to Davis's perceived authority. Pulling his cruiser to the curb, Davis stepped out and adjusted his belt, the radio at his shoulder crackling faintly. The officer's movements were deliberate, designed to project authority. Michael paused mid-step, turning toward the sound of the door slamming shut. His calm eyes met Davis's sharp gaze without flinching. "Afternoon, officer," Michael said, his voice even, almost warm. Davis didn't return the greeting. Instead, he squared his shoulders and crossed his arms. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, his tone clipped. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, though his expression remained composed. "Taking a walk," he replied simply. "It's a beautiful day. You live around here?" Davis pressed, his eyes scanning Michael's plain attire as if searching for something out of place. "A few blocks down," Michael answered, nodding in the direction of his home. "Been here for years." Davis's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've never seen you before." Michael's smile was faint but unwavering. "I'm not out much. Busy with work." "Work, huh?" Davis's tone turned skeptical. "Mind if I see some ID?" Michael's calm faltered slightly as he regarded the officer. He took a slow breath, reaching into his pocket to retrieve his wallet. "Of course," he said, holding out his driver's license. Davis snatched it and glanced at the name and address, his brow furrowing deeper. "Michael Adams," Davis read aloud, his voice laced with disbelief. "This says you live here, but I've been patrolling this neighborhood for years, and I've never seen you." "That doesn't mean I don't belong," Michael replied evenly. "Perhaps we've just never crossed paths before." Davis's hand hovered near his belt, his fingers brushing the radio. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around here," he said, his voice growing sharper. "You're acting awfully calm for someone being questioned by law enforcement." Michael's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "Calmness is not a crime, officer," he said. "And as I said, I'm just out for a walk." Davis stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Stay right here. I'm going to run your ID." Michael sighed but nodded, knowing resistance would only escalate the situation. He remained standing on the sidewalk as Davis returned to his cruiser, the officer's expression betraying a mix of suspicion and irritation. As the minutes ticked by, Michael could feel the weight of the neighbor's stares from behind curtains and hedges. A woman walking her dog slowed, her phone raised as if ready to record. Davis emerged from the car, his irritation now fully evident. "Your records are clean," he admitted, "but that doesn't explain what you're really doing here." Michael's patience was wearing thin. "I've already explained, officer," he said, his tone firm but not confrontational. "I live here. I'm not breaking any laws." Davis's eyes flickered with frustration. "You're coming with me for further questioning," he said, reaching for his handcuffs. Michael's eyes hardened, but he didn't resist as Davis placed him under arrest. The officer's grip was firm, his movements practiced, but there was an undercurrent of unease in his actions. As Michael was led to the patrol car, the small crowd of onlookers grew, their whispers filling the air. At the precinct, Davis processed Michael without ceremony, ignoring the man's quiet dignity as he took fingerprints and mugshots. It wasn't until a senior officer entered the room that the situation took an unexpected turn. "What the hell is going on here?" barked Captain Laura Simmons, her sharp gaze flicking between Davis and Michael. Simmons was a seasoned leader, known for her no-nonsense approach and unwavering sense of justice. "Caught this guy acting suspicious in Silver Ridge Estates," Davis said, his tone defensive. "He claims he lives there, but—" Simmons cut him off with a raised hand. She picked up Michael's ID, her eyes widening as she read the name. "General Michael Adams," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. She turned to Davis, her expression darkening. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Davis faltered. "He said he lived there, but—" "He's one of the highest-ranking generals in the United States Army," Simmons snapped. "And you arrested him for taking a walk." The room fell silent as Davis's face turned pale. Michael, still calm despite the indignity he'd endured, finally spoke. "I'd like my release paperwork now," he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced any further protests. As Simmons ordered Michael's immediate release, Davis stood frozen, the reality of his actions sinking in. What had started as a routine patrol had become a moment that would change his career and his life forever. As Michael stepped out of the precinct, the evening air felt sharper, heavier. He glanced back at the building, then forward, determined to make this incident not just a moment of indignity, but a catalyst. Ripples of reckoning. The morning after his release, General Michael Adams sat at his dining room table, the sunlight streaming through the wide bay windows of his Silver Ridge home. A freshly brewed cup of coffee sat untouched in front of him as he replayed the previous day's events in his mind. Despite the indignity of the arrest, Michael wasn't a man to dwell on anger. Instead, he focused on how to turn a moment of injustice into an opportunity for change. Michael had always believed in the ideals he'd spent his life defending: justice, equality, and respect for every citizen. But yesterday's encounter with Officer Davis was a harsh reminder of the gap that still existed between those ideals and reality. Picking up his phone, he drafted an email to his legal team, outlining the incident in detail. He wasn't seeking revenge, but accountability. Someone needed to answer for the systemic bias that had led to his arrest, and he was determined to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Officer James Davis sat in the cramped break room, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. His mind was a chaotic swirl of regret, confusion, and fear. Captain Laura Simmons' words echoed in his head. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Davis knew he had made a mistake, but it was more than that. For the first time, he was forced to confront the deeply ingrained biases that had guided his actions. He'd always prided himself on being a good officer, someone who protected and served the community. But now he couldn't escape the nagging question: Had he truly been serving everyone equally? The precinct was abuzz with the aftermath of the incident. News had spread quickly, and whispers filled the hallways. Some officers sympathized with Davis, chalking it up to a misunderstanding. Others, including Captain Simmons, were less forgiving. Simmons had spent years trying to build trust between the department and the community, and this incident threatened to unravel much of that progress. Davis, my office. Now, Simmons' voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. Davis set his coffee down and trudged to her office, his stomach churning. He closed the door behind him and stood stiffly, waiting for the inevitable reprimand. "Sit," Simmons said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Davis obeyed, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Simmons began, her tone controlled but brimming with frustration. "You didn't just arrest an innocent man. You arrested a decorated Army general. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" "I thought I was doing my job," Davis mumbled, his voice barely audible. Simmons leaned forward, her eyes piercing. "Your job is to enforce the law, not to act on your biases. Tell me, Davis, what exactly made you think General Adams was suspicious? Was it his demeanor, his clothing, or was it simply the color of his skin?" Davis swallowed hard, unable to answer. The silence was damning. "Effective immediately. You're on administrative leave," Simmons said. "You'll attend mandatory bias training, and I'll be conducting a full review of your record. If I find so much as a hint of misconduct, you'll be out of here. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Mom," Davis said, his voice hollow. "Good. Now get out of my office." Back in Silver Ridge, the neighborhood was buzzing with its own version of events. Word of Michael's arrest had spread quickly, fueled by whispers and the occasional social media post. Opinions were divided. Some residents expressed outrage, condemning the racial profiling and standing in support of their neighbor. Others, however, defended Davis' actions, citing the need for safety and vigilance. Michael's phone buzzed with messages from concerned friends and colleagues. One message stood out. It was from his old friend and fellow Army officer, Colonel Angela Rhodes. "Heard about what happened. Let's talk." Michael called her immediately. Angela's voice was a mix of anger and resolve. "Michael, this isn't just about you. This is about every black man who's ever been profiled, harassed, or worse. You have the platform to make this bigger than a single incident. Use it." Michael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I've been thinking the same thing. I'm reaching out to community leaders and local organizations. This isn't just about what happened to me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again." Angela's tone softened. "You're a good man, Michael. Let me know how I can help." The following week, Michael attended a town hall meeting organized by local activists. The room was packed with residents, journalists, and community leaders. Michael stood at the front, his towering presence commanding attention. When he spoke, his voice was steady, resonating with a mix of authority and humility. "What happened to me is not unique," he began. "I was fortunate to walk away unharmed, but many others haven't been so lucky. This isn't about one officer or one department. This is about a system that allows prejudice to dictate actions. We need change, not just in our police force, but in our society." His words were met with a standing ovation. Among the crowd, Davis watched from the back, his face a mix of shame and contemplation. He hadn't planned to attend, but something had compelled him to come. Hearing Michael's words, he couldn't deny the truth in them. For the first time, Davis saw himself not as the protector of the community, but as part of the problem. As the weeks went on, Michael's efforts began to take shape. He partnered with local organizations to provide training for officers, focusing on implicit bias and community engagement. He also worked with Silver Ridge residents to create a neighborhood committee aimed at fostering inclusivity and understanding. Davis, still on administrative leave, attended every session of the bias training. At first, he approached it with skepticism, but as he listened to the stories of those who'd been profiled and marginalized, something within him began to shift. He realized that his actions weren't just the result of a single bad decision, but part of a pattern he'd never questioned before. One evening, Davis knocked on Michael's door. When Michael opened it, he was surprised to see the officer standing there, his expression earnest. "General Adams," Davis began, his voice hesitant. "I came to apologize, not just for what I did, but for how I've been thinking. I've spent a lot of time reflecting, and I realize now that I've been part of the problem. I want to do better." Michael studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "Acknowledging the problem is the first step, Officer Davis. Let's work on fixing it together." As they shook hands, the snow outside began to fall gently, blanketing the neighborhood in a fresh start. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, a step toward a better future, not just for Silver Ridge Estates, but for everyone. The weight of change. The winter in Silver Ridge Estates deepened, blanketing the neighborhood in a stark, quiet stillness. The snow muted the usual sounds of the town, creating a landscape of reflection for its residents. But for Michael Adams, the season of silence was anything but restful. He was a man on a mission, and his determination to turn a moment of injustice into a movement for change had become his new battlefront. In the days following Officer Davis's unexpected visit and apology, Michael felt a shift in the air, not just in the precinct or the neighborhood, but within himself. While the weight of his own experience was a burden he carried with quiet dignity, he knew that his voice carried a power that could extend beyond his personal narrative. The real work had only just begun. Michael stood at the head of a crowded community hall. The room buzzed with the energy of concerned citizens, local leaders, and members of the police department. A banner at the front of the room read, "Building Bridges, a community conversation on justice and inclusion." "Good evening," Michael began, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. The room quieted instantly, every pair of eyes locked on him. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This isn't just about what happened to me. This is about what happens to so many people every day, people who don't have the platform or the privilege to speak out. It's about ensuring that justice isn't just an ideal, but a reality for everyone." The room erupted into applause. Michael's words carried the weight of experience, and the people gathered knew he wasn't here for theatrics. He was here to lead. Among the attendees was Officer Davis, sitting quietly in the back. Though his administrative leave continued, Davis had insisted on attending. He sat with his hands folded tightly, feeling both the weight of his own actions and the cautious optimism of a man seeking redemption. Every word Michael spoke seemed to pierce through Davis's defenses, forcing him to confront truths he had long ignored. As the meeting progressed, the floor was open for questions and comments. A young woman named Serena raised her hand. She was a college student, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "General Adams, how do you stay so calm and collected after everything you've been through? I mean, you've faced injustice, yet you're standing here, leading this charge with so much grace. How do you do it?" Michael smiled warmly, his gaze steady. "Thank you for your question, Serena. The truth is, it's not always easy. There are moments of frustration, even anger. But I've learned that anger alone doesn't create change. Action does, and if we let our emotions control us, we risk losing sight of the bigger picture. Change requires focus, persistence, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of adversity." The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. For Davis, those words hit particularly hard. He'd spent his career priding himself on being always in control, yet his actions that day had been driven by unconscious fears and biases. Hearing Michael's perspective forced him to reevaluate his understanding of control and strength. In the following weeks, Michael began organizing workshops in collaboration with community leaders, local activists, and the police department. These sessions focused on building empathy, addressing systemic biases, and fostering meaningful dialogue between officers and residents. Michael insisted on being involved in every step, often leading sessions himself. One such session was held at the Silver Ridge Community Center. Officers, including Davis, sat in a circle alongside residents. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful. Michael stood in the center, addressing the group. "Let's start with a simple question," he said. "What does safety mean to you?" A young black man named Terrence spoke first. "Safety, to me, means walking down the street without feeling like a suspect," he said, his voice firm. "It means knowing that the people who are supposed to protect me won't see me as a threat just because of my skin color." Davis shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he remained silent, listening intently. Next, an officer named Carla raised her hand. "As a police officer, safety means making it home to my family at the end of my shift," she said. "It means knowing that I've done my job well and protected my community. But I'll admit, sometimes we're so focused on our own fears that we don't stop to think about how our actions affect others." Michael nodded. "Thank you both for sharing. This is what these conversations are about, understanding each other's perspectives. Safety shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right for everyone." As the session continued, Davis finally found the courage to speak. "I want to say something," he began, his voice hesitant. All eyes turned to him. I've spent the last few weeks reflecting on my actions and the harm they caused. What I did to General Adams was wrong. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure to see him as a person, not just a profile. I'm here because I want to do better, and I want to understand how to rebuild the trust I broke." The room was silent for a moment. Then Michael stepped forward. "Acknowledgement is the first step," he said, placing a hand on Davis's shoulder. "Now comes the hard part, committing to the work of change. It won't be easy, but it's worth it." Meanwhile, Silver Ridge itself was undergoing a transformation. Inspired by Michael's leadership, residents began organizing community events aimed at fostering connection and understanding. Block parties, book clubs, and town hall meetings became more inclusive, drawing in people who had previously felt unwelcome or unheard. One afternoon, Michael received a call from Serena, the college student who had spoken at the town hall. "General Adams, I'm organizing a mentorship program for young people in the community," she said. "I was wondering if you'd be interested in being one of our mentors." Michael's face lit up. "It would be an honor, Serena. Let me know how I can help." As spring approached, the fruits of Michael's efforts became increasingly evident. The once divided community began to feel like a true neighborhood. Relationships between residents and officers improved, and the precinct implemented new policies aimed at increasing accountability and transparency. For Davis, the journey was deeply personal. He volunteered to mentor young officers, sharing his own mistakes as cautionary tales. "We're here to serve," he often told them. "Not to judge, not to assume, but to protect and serve every single person equally." One evening, as Michael walked through Silver Ridge, he passed Davis's patrol car. Davis rolled down the window and nodded respectfully. "Evening, General," Davis said. Michael smiled. "Evening, Officer Davis. Good to see you out here." As Davis drove off, Michael felt a renewed sense of hope. Change was possible, but it required work, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And as the lights of Silver Ridge twinkled in the distance, Michael knew this was just the beginning. Breaking barriers, building bridges. Spring brought new life to Silver Ridge Estates. Flowers bloomed in carefully curated gardens, children played in the parks, and the air carried the promise of renewal. For General Michael Adams, the season was a metaphor for the transformation he hoped to inspire. The seeds of change he had sown in the winter were beginning to take root, but there was still much work to be done. Michael sat at his kitchen table, a stack of notes and emails spread out before him. The mentorship program Serena had spearheaded was gaining momentum, and his community workshops were drawing larger crowds with each session. But for Michael, the most meaningful progress came in the form of quiet moments, the nods of acknowledgement from neighbors who once looked past him, the invitations to speak at schools, and the letters of gratitude from people who had found their voices through his example. Across town, Officer James Davis faced his own season of renewal. Administrative leave had been both a punishment and an opportunity. The mandatory bias training had opened his eyes to the blind spots in his thinking, and he had begun to engage with the community in ways he never had before. Davis volunteered at local food drives and attended neighborhood cleanup events, where he worked alongside residents he might have once viewed with suspicion. One such event brought Davis face-to-face with Terrence, the young man who had spoken passionately at one of Michael's workshops. Terrence was organizing a community basketball game to raise funds for a local youth center. Davis hesitated at first, unsure of how his presence would be received, but he ultimately decided to join the effort. The day of the basketball game was bright and warm, the kind of day that made people linger outside just to soak up the sun. The court buzzed with energy as kids dribbled balls and practiced their shots. Families set up folding chairs along the sidelines, and a grill sizzled with the promise of burgers and hot dogs. Michael arrived early, his tall frame easily visible among the crowd. He greeted Terrence with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "You've done an incredible job putting this together," Michael said. Terrence grinned. "Thanks, General. But it's not just me. Everyone's pitching in. That's what this is all about, community." Michael nodded, his chest swelling with pride. Moments like this reminded him why he had committed himself to this work. When Davis arrived, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Conversations quieted, and a few curious glances were cast his way. Davis felt the weight of those stares, but he squared his shoulders and approached Terrence and Michael with a tentative smile. "Officer Davis," Michael greeted him, extending a hand. "Glad you could make it." Davis shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, General. I'm here to help however I can." Terrence studied Davis for a moment before offering his hand as well. "Good to have you here," he said, his tone measured but sincere. The game began with laughter and cheers, the sound of sneakers squeaking on the asphalt, and the rhythmic bounce of basketballs echoing across the court. Davis found himself on a team with a mix of kids and adults, including Terrence. At first, the dynamic was awkward, but as the game progressed, the tension eased. Davis surprised everyone, including himself, with his quick reflexes and sharp passes. "Not bad for an old-timer," Terrence joked after Davis sank a three-pointer. Davis chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Gotta keep up with you young guys somehow." By the end of the game, the air was filled with camaraderie. High fives and congratulations were exchanged, and Davis felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. For the first time, he saw the people around him not as strangers or potential threats, but as neighbors and friends. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Davis approached Michael, who was helping fold chairs. "General," Davis began, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. Not just for the community, but for me. I didn't realize how much I needed to change until I met you." Michael paused, his hands resting on the back of a chair. "Change isn't easy, Officer Davis. It takes courage to look at yourself honestly and make a commitment to be better. I respect that." Davis's throat tightened. "I spent a lot of time thinking about what you said, about action being more important than words. I want to do more than just apologize. I want to make things right." Michael's expression softened. "Then start by being the kind of officer who builds bridges instead of walls. Listen to the people you serve. Stand with them, not above them." Davis nodded, the weight of Michael's words settling over him. "I will," he said. "I promise." The ripple effects of the basketball game were felt throughout the community. The youth center received a generous donation, and the bonds formed that day continued to grow. Davis became a familiar face at community events, and his efforts to rebuild trust began to bear fruit. He knew he still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was truly making a difference. Michael, too, found himself inspired by the progress. He continued to lead workshops, mentor young leaders like Terrence, and advocate for systemic change. His home became a hub of activity, a place where people gathered to share ideas and plan for the future. One evening, as Michael sat on his porch watching the sunset, Serena arrived with a notebook in hand. "General," she said, sitting beside him, "I've been thinking about ways to expand the mentorship program. What if we paired officers with young people in the community? It could be a way to build trust and understanding." Michael's eyes lit up. "That's a brilliant idea, Serena. Let's make it happen." The program launched a month later, with Davis volunteering as one of the first mentors. He was paired with Malik, a 16-year-old aspiring basketball player who had initially been wary of the idea. Over time, their weekly meetings became a highlight for both of them. Davis shared stories of his early career, while Malik taught him the finer points of basketball strategy. One afternoon, Malik asked a question that caught Davis off guard. "Do you think people can really change?" Davis thought for a moment before answering. "I think people can change if they want to. It's not easy, and it takes time. But if you're willing to listen, to learn, and to try, yeah, I think it's possible." Malik nodded thoughtfully. "Good, because I think you're proof of that." Davis felt a lump in his throat, but managed a smile. "Thanks, Malik. That means a lot." As spring turned to summer, the changes in Silver Ridge became undeniable. The neighborhood that had once been defined by its divisions was now a community united by its commitment to justice and understanding. For Michael Davis and the countless others who had contributed to this transformation, the journey was far from over. But they knew they were on the right path, and that was enough. On a warm July evening, the community gathered for a celebration at the local park. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael stood before the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "Change isn't a destination," he said. "It's a journey. And today, I'm proud to say we're on that journey together." The road to redemption. The heat of midsummer brought life to every corner of Silver Ridge Estates. Children raced through sprinklers, neighbors gathered for barbecues, and laughter filled the air. But amidst the sunshine and celebration, deeper changes were unfolding, ones that would leave a lasting impact on the neighborhood. General Michael Adams had become a well-known figure not only in Silver Ridge, but also in surrounding communities. His leadership in fostering understanding and addressing systemic biases had earned him the admiration of many. Yet Michael's focus remained firmly on the work still ahead. He knew change required consistency, not just moments of progress. One evening, Michael found himself seated at a roundtable discussion at the local community center. The event, titled Stories That Heal, aimed to provide a platform for residents and officers to share personal experiences. The room was packed, and the energy was a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Terrence, the young man who had organized the basketball fundraiser, was the first to speak. "When I was a kid," he began, "I thought the police were supposed to protect everyone. But as I got older, I started to notice that wasn't always the case, at least not for people who look like me. I'm here tonight because I want that to change. I want my little brother to grow up believing in fairness and justice." Applause filled the room as Terrence sat down. Next to speak was Officer James Davis. He hesitated for a moment, visibly nervous. Public speaking was never his strong suit, but tonight felt different. This wasn't just about speaking. It was about making amends. "I'll be honest," Davis began, his voice steady but low. "When I first joined the force, I thought I understood what it meant to serve and protect. But over time, I let assumptions guide my actions instead of facts. I hurt people without realizing the damage I was doing." He paused, glancing at Michael, who gave him a reassuring nod. Arresting General Adams was the wake-up call I needed. It made me realize how much I still had to learn. Since then, I've been working to unlearn those biases and to rebuild trust, not just in this community, but within myself. The room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. Davis sat down, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness he sought, but the opportunity to prove through actions that he could be better. Over the next few weeks, Davis and Michael found themselves working side by side more often. The mentorship program Serena had envisioned was thriving, with officers and youth paired together to foster mutual understanding. Davis's mentee, Malik, had become a frequent visitor at the precinct, where he shadowed officers and learned about their day-to-day responsibilities. One afternoon, Malik and Davis stood in the precinct's briefing room, reviewing maps of Silver Ridge. "What do all these markings mean?" Malik asked, pointing to a cluster of red dots. "Those are areas where we've had a lot of calls," Davis explained. "The goal is to figure out patterns and come up with solutions that help the community instead of just reacting to problems." Malik nodded thoughtfully. "So it's about prevention, not just punishment." Davis smiled. "Exactly. That's the kind of policing we're trying to move toward." Malik grinned. "Sounds like you're figuring it out, Officer Davis." Davis chuckled. "It's a work in progress, Malik. Always will be." As the summer continued, Silver Ridge saw a surge in community-driven initiatives. Block parties, charity drives, and neighborhood cleanups became regular occurrences. Michael's home remained a hub of activity, with residents dropping by to share ideas or simply to chat over coffee. One evening, Michael received a call from Serena. "General," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "The mayor wants to meet with us to discuss implementing the mentorship program citywide." Michael's heart swelled with pride. "That's fantastic news, Serena. Let's prepare a presentation that shows how impactful this program has been so far." The meeting with the mayor marked a turning point. Impressed by the program's success, the city allocated funding to expand it across multiple neighborhoods. Michael, Serena, and Davis were invited to lead the effort, a testament to their dedication and teamwork. As summer gave way to autumn, the neighborhood gathered for a celebratory dinner in the park. Strings of lights hung between trees, casting a warm glow over the tables laden with food. Residents laughed and shared stories, their voices mingling with the sound of leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Michael stood at the head of the main table, raising a glass. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the progress we've made, but the connections we've built. Change isn't easy, but it's possible when we work together. Thank you all for being part of this journey." The crowd erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the park. Davis, seated beside Malik, felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged, not because of his badge, but because of the relationships he had forged. That night, as Michael walked home under the stars, he reflected on how far they had come. The road to redemption was long and fraught with challenges, but the journey was worth it. Silver Ridge had become more than just a neighborhood. It was a community united by its commitment to justice and understanding. Michael paused at his gate, looking up at the sky. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, as if mirroring the hope that now filled his heart. With a deep breath, he stepped inside, ready to continue the work that lay ahead. A community transformed. Autumn had wrapped Silver Ridge Estates in a patchwork of gold and crimson. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the hum of preparations for the annual neighborhood harvest festival. What had started as a small tradition had grown into a symbol of the community's transformation, a celebration of unity, progress, and newfound understanding. General Michael Adams stood at the edge of the park, taking in the scene. Booths lined the pathway, offering everything from homemade jams to hand-carved ornaments. Children laughed as they darted between games, their joy unbridled and infectious. Michael felt a swell of pride. This was the Silver Ridge he had always envisioned, a place where differences were celebrated, not feared. A legacy of leadership. Michael's journey from the arrest months ago to this moment had been transformative, not just for him, but for the entire neighborhood. The mentorship program, now expanded citywide, was thriving. Serena had become the youngest board member of the local civic association, and Malik, once hesitant to engage with authority figures, now spoke confidently at public forums. At the festival, Michael spotted Serena helping at a booth promoting the mentorship program. She waved him over, her smile radiant. "General, you have to see this," she said, gesturing to a poster board filled with photos and testimonials from mentees and their mentors. Michael scanned the board, his heart swelling as he read stories of lives change. One testimonial from a young man named Jaden stood out. "Before this program, I felt invisible. My mentor showed me that I have a voice and that it matters. Now I'm planning to go to college and study criminal justice to make a difference." Serena watched Michael's expression soften. "This is your legacy," she said. Michael shook his head, his voice humble. "This is our legacy. None of this would have been possible without you and everyone who believed in this vision." Bridges built. Nearby, Officer James Davis stood at a booth marked, "Meet your local officers." He handed out flyers and spoke with residents, his demeanor far removed from the stern authority figure he had once been. The festival had given him an opportunity to connect with the community in ways he never imagined. A woman approached the booth, her young son clutching her hand. "Officer Davis," she asked tentatively. Davis turned to her with a warm smile. "Yes, Mom. How can I help you?" "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "My son, Caleb, talks about you all the time. He says you're his favorite mentor." Davis crouched down to Caleb's level, his smile widening. "Is that true, Caleb?" The boy nodded shyly. "You taught me how to dribble a basketball better. And you said I could be anything I want to be." Davis's throat tightened. "You can, Caleb. And I'll be cheering you on every step of the way." As the mother and son walked away, Davis felt a wave of gratitude. He had started this journey seeking redemption, but what he found was a purpose far greater than himself. The Harvest Festival speech. As the evening set in, the festival goers gathered near the main stage. Twinkling lights strung across the trees cast a warm glow over the crowd. Michael stepped onto the stage, the microphone in his hand, and looked out at the sea of faces. Familiar ones like Serena, Terrence, and Malik stood near the front, their eyes filled with pride. Even Davis stood among them, a quiet but significant presence. "Good evening, Silver Ridge," Michael began, his voice steady and resonant. "Tonight, we gather not just to celebrate the harvest season, but to honor the growth we've seen in our community." He paused, letting his words settle. "When I first came to Silver Ridge, I saw its beauty and its potential. But like any community, we had challenges to face. This year, we faced them together. We opened our hearts and minds to one another, and we built something stronger than walls or fences. We built trust." The crowd erupted in applause, but Michael held up a hand to quiet them. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone who's been on a journey of his own," he continued. "Officer James Davis, your courage to confront your own biases and work toward change has inspired us all. Thank you for showing us that growth is possible, no matter where you start." Davis's face turned red as the crowd erupted into cheers, but he managed a small smile and nodded in appreciation. Michael concluded his speech with a call to action. "The work isn't over. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen alone. But together, we can continue to grow, to learn, and to build a future we can all be proud of. Thank you." As he stepped off the stage, Michael was greeted with handshakes, hugs, and words of gratitude. Among them was Davis, who extended his hand. "Thank you, General," Davis said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Michael shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Officer Davis, for proving that change is possible. A new beginning." As the festival wound down, Michael walked home under the canopy of stars. He passed familiar houses, each one representing a story, a family, a life intertwined with the community he now called home. He thought about the journey they had all taken together, the obstacles, the triumphs, and the bonds they had forged. Silver Ridge was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a testament to the power of resilience, understanding, and the courage to change. And as Michael stepped through his front door, he knew that their story was far from over. It was simply the beginning of a brighter, more inclusive future, one built not on fear, but on trust and hope.